evening, everyone. My name is Corky, and I'm with Yolo Basin Foundation, and we're going to be sharing with you this evening about Motus. And I am very personally excited about this program because, of course, I'm hopeful that the Motus projects that are going up around the state are going to help us to find out more about where the bats that live under the Yolo Causeway are doing. But of course, many of us also are birders, and tonight's talk with Mary Whitfield will be much about the birds and the information that Motus can help us with that. Also want to mention that next month, I'm hoping you join us so that we can hear about snakes. Snakes of the Central Valley with Michael Starkey, who has founded Save the Snakes, and we'll be sharing information about some of these spectacular serpents. So Mary will be sharing with us about the Motus project that is taking place in the West, and she'll be going over things such as why it's important to know more about the life cycle and how that helps with conservation, the technology that is important for Motus, the initiative to help the Motus towers come to the western part of the United States, how these applications work, and how that we can get involved to help to promote this and maybe expand these projects even more. So I'm going to be passing now on to Mary Whitfield of the Southern Sierra Research Station to share this information with us.
Good. And the stopover and winter habitat are not protected. And that's what, when you hear people talking about full life cycle ecology, that's what they're talking about. Unfortunately, for most migrants, little is known of their movements and ecology during the non-breeding season. Okay, it looks like this froze a little bit for some reason. So tracking birds is a way that we can help identify important sites during the life cycle. And there are a number of tools that we can use to get at the pieces of the puzzles. For example, the GPS satellite, which is probably one of the gold standards, but the problem is you have to have fairly large animals to use those, and they're also really expensive. And then there's geolocators, which are small, but they're geographically not very precise. They're plus or minus, they can be plus or minus 100 kilometers. Banding and radio telemetry are some of the oldest methods that that have been used. But recent technological advances have breathed new life into radio telemetry, specifically through digitally coded tags and automated radio telemetry systems, and Motus is one of those. So basically, Motus is just another tool in the toolbox. It can't replace all other ways to track animals, but it complements them. And so what tool you use depends on your research questions and your budget. So for example, here's banding as a tool, a color banding. This is a yellow-billed cuckoo with a satellite tag, and that bird is currently, I think it's in Argentina right now. Right here, this is a four-wheel with a geolocator, and then there's a bat with a Motus tag. However, so basically the digital radio tags, the way they work is they work on the same frequency, and then there's two frequencies that are currently in use through the Motus system, and that one of them is 166.38 and the other one is 434. So a lot of our, almost all the stations in the West, the great majority are dual mode stations, so they use both frequencies. The stations operate continuously with up to 8 directional antenna and detection distances of up to 10 to 20 kilometers. And there's pretty high temporal and geographic precision, and the animals don't need to be recaptured, which is really big. However, the tags don't work that well sometimes when birds are in heavy cover, for example, under really dense canopy, high canopy cover, in dense vegetation, etc. And they also don't give precise locations, though you can obtain them with traditional receivers and Yagi antenna. And then CTT has also developed a node network that you could use to supplement. So what is Motus? It's basically a collaborative international research network that uses basically a common community infrastructure with a centralized database. And there's public data and visualizations available, and you can set how much sharing you want to do with your data when you use Motus when you're tagging birds. And it's a program of Bird Studies Canada in partnership with a lot of different collaborating researchers and organizations. And so here's basically kind of a picture of how it works. See if I can get the little laser pointer. Ooh, that didn't work. Okay, so basically the way it works is you put let's say you put a tag on a shorebird, and it flies over a Motus station. So the Motus station picks it up, or maybe somebody has used a Yagi antenna and they upload it into the common Motus database. And so basically users can put that data in other portals as well, besides the Motus database and MoveBank or the Avian Knowledge or the Avian Knowledge Network. It's good to have both. And the public could also look at some of the data depending on the settings. And that data can be used for conservation science, and for obviously for the people who tag the birds as well, can figure things out and come up with policies, management recommendations, and conservation actions through that data. Okay. Try to get off this highlighter part. Okay. Okay, so Motus first started in 2014, and I first became interested in it in about 2017. And one of the things that I first noticed that there were hardly any stations in the West. So that was definitely a problem if you wanted to have a project there and you wanted to get some larger movement data. So at that time, between that time period, it grew pretty rapidly to 500 receiving stations with a lot of tagged individuals of 3 different taxa and over 300 million detections. So as I noted before, there were very few Motus stations in the West. And some of the issues is that lack of coverage, which I showed you, and that there were very few studies of migration in the West. So there's a lot that we don't know when you compare it to what is known in the East. And there's also challenging topography that we have to deal with. So as you can see from this slide, there's virtually no cover in the West in 2017, not much. And as part of the initiative, we set our, the area that we wanted to cover was basically from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. So we had very high ambitions for the project. So when you look at studies of bird migration in the West, one paper that was a really good paper that reviewed what was known about neotropical migratory stopover areas and research into birds. And so Bailey et al. In 2018 synthesized over 160 publications on that. And they were focusing on neotropical stopover regions and basically migration biology. One thing they did notice is that a lot of times people did not differentiate between true stopovers, where birds stay quite a while and they fuel up and they spend a lot of time refueling, versus roost rest stops, where basically they may not be eating that much, but they have to stop and rest. And then you have the bottleneck areas, which are really important. So those are passage points that are where basically a lot of animals are going through in that small area, and they have outsized importance sometimes because a lot of animals can die in those areas if conditions aren't right. But one of the major things that conclusions they came out is that results from the West are scant. So there weren't many papers that dealt with Western migration at all, and it's very poorly understood. And so if you look at this, these located bottlenecks, most of them really aren't for Western birds at all. Most of them are from Eastern birds. So I think once we get more studies of Western bird migration, some of these bottleneck regions probably more will be identified. Some of them will stay the same for sure, but there'll probably be more identified. So for topography and scale, with our ambitious idea of going from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, there's extreme diversity in climate in the West. You can see from the Arctic into the Antarctic actually, and you have desert regions, you have forested regions, and you have a lot of really areas without many people at all. And so basically the estimated size of that area that's roughly outlined is about 36 million square kilometers. So one thing that we notice is that the way that Partners in Flight approaches things is really similar to the way Motus approaches and the way it works. And so they're both coordinated, collaborative, and international approaches for solving problems. And basically expanding the scope and spatial scale of research questions during all phases of the annual cycle. And you try to focus your monitoring efforts around local regional questions, but you also focus on species and conservation challenges of the continental hemispheric scope. So really one of the ways that, one of the first problems that we had with promoting Motus in the West was a chicken and an egg problem, because if you wanted to get these big regional movements, you needed more stations, and people didn't want to put stations if not many people had tagged birds that the stations would detect. So the way we approached it is you try to encourage people to have smaller scale projects that they're putting stations on and maybe coordinating with others. So you start small with small scale projects, and then hopefully those increase to a regional network.
They're tracking birds.
So basically the Western Initiative seeks to understand what limits bird populations currently and in the future. And this will require tracking birds across their entire life cycle. So one of the main purposes of the initiative is to provide better information to assess threats. So we really need to assess the threats of migratory bird populations in an era of rapid global change. And Western North America is experiencing emerging threats to bird populations and droughts made worse by climate change and related impacts. And those are just numerous and growing. These threats include increased changes in surface and water temperatures, higher rates of transpiration, which leads to decrease in water availability, and shrinking lakes and reservoirs in the Southwest and Intermountain West. Increased temperatures are also increasing water stress in forests, which lead to more forest dieback in many regions. And as you've noticed, increased fire seasons across the West, most forest and grassland regions of the West. It's been crazy. Coastal birds will also continue to be impacted by changes in ocean conditions, including ocean acidification, sea level rise, human disturbance in coastal stopover areas due to increased diversion of surface waters for irrigation. And those can both impact bird use of key stopover and rest sites, as well as impacting breeding. So, I mean, all of that just means we need a lot more information about how animals move and how they can basically adjust, and what we can do to help minimize some of those impacts. So basically the Western Motus Initiative began in 2018 with the goal to expand the Motus network in the West from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. And since then, interest in Motus has snowballed despite the challenges of COVID-19. So you can see these are pictures of existing stations. And so this is one that has a tripod setup. This is one that we put directly on a rock, on a hill overseeing that. Here's one that's on an old water tower. And this is kind of an example of, this is what a Motus station looks like, or in the little box. So basically, this explosive growth has occurred in about 4 years. So let's see if I can get this to go. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so this basically was this projection was done at the end of November. So there actually are more stations in California now, as you'll see in the next picture. So here's what it looked like in 2018. This is what it looks like now in January of 2022. So you could see that a whole bunch more stations came up right in there. And then from a spreadsheet that the Partners in Flight Western Working Group maintains, the dots in orange were the ones we knew already had funding. Some of them are now up. When this slide was first put together was in August. And now a lot of those are in existence. And so, but there's more to come. And so by the end of 2022, a conservative estimate is that we'll have well over 250 stations in the West. So right now, currently there's 1,200 receiving stations and 30,000 individuals of more than 270 species and hundreds of millions of detections. And so here's another way to look at it if you just want to look at the numbers. And this was also done in August. So these numbers are actually much greater than what's shown right here. So if you also, another growth is the growth in tags. You can see from this little schematic that the number of tags are also growing. And I think you're going to see exponential growth in tags once that 2022 is shown. There's a lot more people tagging them now. So these are some of the priorities, key priorities of the Partners in Flight Western Working Group Motus Initiative. And so one thing that's really important is trying to reduce barriers and getting more stations in Latin America, because if you think about it, you have all the birds in North America, so basically in Canada and the US, and that's a big landmass, and they funnel themselves down into Mexico and then into Central America, and then a few more in South America, but most of them are in Mexico and Central America, and that's a much smaller landmass. So the density of those migrating birds is much higher in Latin America than it is in North America. So when you put stations there, you're much more likely to get detections with those stations there. And there are also areas that we don't know as much about, where certain populations are overwintering and how they move in that area. And it's also typically difficult to get funding and equipment to Latin America, and we're working to reduce those barriers. And the last thing we want to do that we've started doing is creating strategic plans in the different subregions that are now in existence and are currently more and more popping up, which is great. So this is an example of a study of Western sandpiper and semi-palmated plover movement. A lot of these birds, most of them, just about all of them, I believe, were tagged in Canada. However, if you look at the lack of stations in between points and further south, make some of these pathways incomplete. And also notice that the Central Valley stations were not present at the time these birds came through the area. So now I suspect that these movements in here will look really different than these straight lines if they repeat this project next year, or if these birds have life tags when they start coming back. And this can really also lead to misleading conservation efforts. For example, if these birds, let's say we didn't have any stations right here, and so the only thing the Canadian banders were getting is maybe some of these birds going to Washington, but then they're getting all these detections in the Gulf Coast, and they might think that Texas and the Gulf Coast area are the important areas for their shorebirds, whereas you can see that the West is also important for some of their populations. So basically, international collaborations will be critical for filling in the gaps. So, and that's exactly what is happening. Is there's been it's promoted a lot of international collaborations. So this movement study involved collaborators in Canada, US, and Mexico. And it's brought groups together in all three countries to collaborate on joint projects. In the spring of 2019, Partners in Flight and the Pacific Flyway International Connections were instrumental in establishing the first Western Motus stations in the continental US at Grays Harbor in northwestern Washington, which is a critical stopover area for shorebirds. And the Canadians, they drove the equipment across the border and helped build the stations with their American colleagues. So another example is more local, and some of you, I'm sure, have heard about this joint Nature Conservancy, Point Blue and Southern Sierra Research Station project, and basically the purpose of it was to document the length of stay for individual wintering shorebirds in the Central Valley, and to document the timing and frequency of movements between Central Valley and nearby coastal regions, and departure dates from the Central Valley. So this map shows just the new stations from the partners in the study. And there are also others putting up towers in the area, such as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So basically, what our role as Southern Sierra Research Station, we went out and built the stations, and Point Blue and the Nature Conservancy found the funders and designed the study, and Point Blue's carrying out all the tagging of all the birds. And so basically there's 14 new stations since August 2021 in the Central Valley, which is pretty awesome. And we're gonna put up a couple more later this winter as well. And they selected these sites based on past captures of focal species, flooded fields, and California state priorities. So far, I think they purchased 89 tags, and they've deployed, looks like about 36 right now. And so the next slide, I'm going to show a quick animation showing the preliminary view of the tracks of some of the shorebirds tagged on the project. Yeah, those birds are moving a lot more than I would have thought. So now you have some idea of the cool data you can collect from Motus and really important information you can get from it. Here are some ideas that can help speed up and expand the building of Motus stations that'll be there for the long term. Help funding a Motus station nearby a strategic area or tags for a project are some of the really helpful things that can happen, especially with tags. The more tags can be a relatively inexpensive way if an organization doesn't have as much money, but it could be really helpful. They run about, I think if you want to include tax and shipping, and then Motus charges, I think around, depending on how many Motus stations, $25 to $30 for the data part of the tag. So it's around $250 to almost $300 per tag. So another thing that could help speed it up is basically we need to try to get more workshops and train more people throughout the region. So it's just not relying on just specific people, like let's say the research station to build them. We want people that are capable of building stations throughout the state. I think that's the best way to approach that, and that can also maintain them. And another super important thing that I've touched on before is just more funding for non-breeding research south of the US border is really important. And another great way is Motus is building more and more outreach tools for multiple groups, whether they're researchers, conservationists, land managers, policymakers, educators, landowners, students. So that could be a really good way to spread the word and get more people interested in Motus. So here's a few potential groups with current Motus projects that could use help. Research station, we have a lot of different projects that we are, Motus projects that we're currently working on. Paso Pacifico is a great organization if you want to get stations on the other side of the border. Specifically, they're doing a lot of work in El Salvador and Nicaragua. And the Klamath Bird Observatory has a small Motus project in Vesper sparrows that winter also in the Central Valley of California. And then Pronatura Noroeste is doing a lot of Motus work in northwestern Mexico, and they're planning to put up more stations, including up the Colorado River, in the Colorado River Delta, and maybe further up in the Colorado River in Mexico. And I think that will be a super important, because that's a very important migration area. So basically, the more people that work with us throughout the West, the better off we are. And It's critically important to find more partners from Latin America because, as I've mentioned many times, birds do spend the majority of their life there, and little is known about that time period for most species. And that's it. Oh, one thing I should touch on. We do have the bunch of existing sub-regional groups in Western Canada, the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West, Great Plains, California, Southwest, Mexico, Central America, and North America. And there are more coming on board as well as we speak. All right.
Thank you, Mary. Lots of great information. Again, really exciting projects going on. We have one up in our wildlife area that went in during the winter time. And my understanding is that it has actually picked up Dunlin and Dowagers.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, should I go ahead and do the stop share?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
There we go. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and okay. So one of them was early on when you were showing some of the maps, and the question is how come there are no stations in Brazil?
I'm trying to think if there may be, right. Yeah, I guess there isn't. I'm not sure. I guess they haven't found any partners in Brazil yet. I think there is one in Paraguay, which is not Brazil, I know, but and Chile, I think, has some too. But yeah, we need definitely to get more in South America as well. And Nick Bailey is working on that. So he's the guy who is working northern South America. But, you know, I'm sure he'd be happy to get some in Brazil as well. And he works out of Colombia. Selva is the name of his organization. And they can always use more help as well.
Who is responsible for maintaining the stations?
So it's basically the people that who sometimes it's the people that are funding them, and sometimes it's the people that are putting them up, or the landowner. For example, MPG Ranch in Montana has put up a lot of stations throughout the Intermountain West, and including one in California on Apricot Lane Farm. So they put up the station for Apricot Lane Farms, and I believe they paid for a lot of it, but Apricot Lane Farms is in charge of the upkeep of it. So they just, they work that out. And I think they've done that with others. For example, they did build and I think helped fund some for Klamath Bird Observatory, but KBO is maintaining those stations.
Do you have any bat tag data?
I don't have any with me, but I have a talk, an Eastern talk that somebody sent me that showed some of the results from some of the research in the East on bats.
That, of course, was from one of our bat biologists.
Yeah.
Are there any stations in Puerto Rico?
I think there is. I don't know for sure, but I think there is.
And do the radio tags record tracks and download them to the station when detected? Or is it just the station location recorded when a detection occurs?
That's correct. It's just that the station records that location. So when you see those lines, those are just guesses. They aren't actually how the bird is moving, probably.
So maybe as more towers go up?
Yeah, the more towers you have up, the more accurate that migration pathway is going to be.
And are there many stations in southern South America, Peru, Chile, Argentina?
Yes, if I'm remembering, there's definitely some in Chile. I'm not 100% sure about Argentina. I think there is. There's at least 1 or 2 in Ecuador, and Colombia probably has the most. And I think Peru has one too.
Are the stations solar powered? And what kind of maintenance is needed for the station?
Some of the stations are solar powered and some are, if there's power available and where they're putting them, then that's the best way. You just put the power that for the building where it's available. Though you can also put a drip charge for a battery in case you have power outages, and it could still work. Yeah, then we have, for areas where there isn't power available, then you put in a solar panel and a battery or 2, depending on the area. For example, I think in the Central Valley, they needed to put a couple batteries in some of the places that are prone to getting bogged in.
What about the device on the animal itself? How is that powered?
There's 2 ways. Or actually 3 now. So there's what they call, there's the battery operated tags. So those have limited life. And then they have what's now called life tags. And those have little solar little solar panels. The problem with those ones is a lot of times once it gets dark, they run out of power. And so if you want night migration, you're not going to get it. But now they also have hybrid tags, which have like a combination of a little solar panel plus a battery. So those can get the night migration. The problem is when you go with that, then the tags get a little heavier. So I think the lightest hybrid tag right now is 0.65 grams, which, is still pretty good. It's still pretty impressive, but for little birds like willow flycatchers, that's just not going to work.
Do you know how, what percentage or how heavy a tag can go on some of those, say a 10-gram bird?
Yeah, well, ideally you want to do no more than 3% of body weight. And that includes the harness material that you use for the tags, which usually is pretty tiny, but you still want to take it into account. And for bats, I don't know what the guidelines are for bats.
Do we have other questions here? Oh, what kind of insects are tagged?
I'm trying to think the ones I know about. I know for sure monarchs have been tagged. And then Pat Lorch, who now works for us, and he's the one who put up a lot of those Central Valley stations. He used them on some Mormon crickets and a study for those. So that was pretty crazy. I think dragonflies, I think they've also done some on dragonflies.
Those must be tiny tags.
Yeah, they're pretty tiny tags, but I guess insects can take a higher, proportional weight.
Huh. Lots of great, oh, another one here. Have there been any towers built on college campuses?
In the East, yes, there definitely have. And I think those are really good ways, if you can get professors that want to kind of use that as a teaching tool, it's a really great way to get more stations.
How much does the equipment cost for a station?
Yeah, that's a common question, and it's unfortunately not an easy answer, in that it really depends on what the setup is. So if you have, let's say, a building, and all you have to do is put the pole that with the antenna, the mast that holds the antennas, and you attach it to the building and you have power and Wi-Fi, then that's probably going to be one of your cheapest setups. And that's probably right now, with, if you factor in the inflation we've been experiencing, it's probably around $3,500 to $4,000. If you need to have some sort of basically tripod or some structure to put the station on, plus a solar panel and several batteries, and then a little, some of these stations have little cell phone cards in them, and it costs $5 a month for the card, and then plus data charges, which usually aren't very much, maybe a couple dollars to maybe about $10 a month for those. So those can go up to around as high as 10,000, though I don't think we've built any $10,000 stations yet. Hopefully we won't. Hopefully prices don't go that high.
Do you know how many are actually in the Delta itself?
You mean the
Delta where we live?
Pat would probably know that answer better than me. I'm not sure. I think if you go on the Motus website, you can look at the maps and see that if you go to motus.org.
I have a visitor here that says that they're going to talk to the head of their department about your presentation. So maybe you'll get some collaboration there.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be good. What kind of repairs are needed over time to a station?
Yeah, it's really dependent. We had to actually replace the sensor station because somebody hiked up to that hill that we put that mast on the rock, and they were curious about it. That's why it's really good to have signs and maybe lock the box. They were curious. They opened up our action packer and they looked at it, and they opened up the station and looked at it. Then they closed it, but didn't close it properly. And it rained, and the rain got into the action packer, and then it kind of pooled and destroyed the sensor station because it was sitting in a little water. So that would cost more, but typical maintenance, assuming that you don't have anybody messing with the station. A lot of times you have to go check the guy wires now and then that are holding the antennas in place. It's usually pretty small stuff. Probably on average, it's only maybe, not including labor, $100 to maybe $200 a year to maintain, maybe less.
And then is there a station in the Yellow Basin?
Yeah.
And there is.
Yes.
We had one that was put up, is it December maybe? And then there's one slated to go in at Conaway Ranch, which is to the north of us, not far, by the Nature Conservancy, I believe. And then CDFW has several more throughout the state. I think Grizzly Island already has one, which is in the Sassoon area. And I'm not real sure what their other locations are. All right. I am not seeing other questions coming in right now. So I want to thank Mary for joining us. Tell us where you are right now.
I'm actually at the Southern Sierra Research Station right now in Weldon. So that's in the Kern River Valley.
You know, it's one of the positives of learning how to do these things virtually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That we're able to get experts from areas that aren't just right here in our own town. Yeah. And I do want to, of course, remind people that next month, we're going to be hearing from Michael Starkey. He'll be sharing with us again, whoopsie. No. There. Be sharing with us about snakes of the Central Valley. So that might be something of interest to you, and hopefully highlighting maybe a few that we have here in our wildlife area. And you're getting comments of thank yous and interested in what you're doing. I forgot to start the recording right at the very beginning. I'm sure you noticed that when it came in. But I will drop those slides into the front end of the recording. So when I have it finished and put it up, The slides will be there, but we won't hear your voice on, I think it was the first two. But appreciate your time. Thank you so much
and thank you for the invitation.
You betcha. You betcha. All right. Have a great evening, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you next month.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for attending.